The film begins on a dark night as an old woman slowly walks through the house. She enters a room where a young man named Vinu is sleeping. Hearing the noise, Vinu wakes up, turns on the light, and sees his grandmother. He quickly wakes his mother, Asha, and tells her that grandma is awake. Asha gets up, and together, they take the old woman back to her room. Asha notices that her mother's diaper needs to be changed, so she asks Vinu to help her. While helping his mother, Vinu complains that they cannot keep doing this many times every day. He suggests hiring a home nurse to take care of grandma, but Asha sadly says they cannot afford it because her salary is barely enough for their daily needs. Later, Asha and Vinu go back to their rooms to sleep. Meanwhile, in the grandmother's room, something slowly approaches her in the dark. She notices it and looks toward it. Just then, the scene cuts. The next day, the grandmother is found dead. Vinu performs the funeral rituals, but he shows no emotion. Meanwhile, Asha is deeply heartbroken by her mother's death. That night, Asha sits alone in her room, crying and mourning her mother. At the same time, Vinu quietly eats his dinner. While eating, he receives a call from his girlfriend Priya, but he ignores it and cuts the call. The next day, Asha visits a hospital and meets a lady doctor named Beena. The doctor explains that Asha has clinical depression, which is a mental health disorder, and asks if anyone else in her family has had similar problems. Asha says that her mother used to get angry very quickly and become upset over small things. Even so, her mother understood her very well, and Asha used to share all her problems with her. Later, her mother had a stroke and slowly lost her memory. Asha then says her mother recently passed away. The doctor advises Asha to continue her medication. When the doctor asks who lives with her now, Asha says she has a son named Vinu who finished his D-Pharm and is currently looking for a job. The doctor asks if her son is open with her like she was with her own mother. Asha replies that her son is not like her and that he does not easily share his feelings. In the next scene, Asha meets her relative Madhu. Madhu asks about Vinu's plans and his job search. Asha says Vinu is still looking for a job. She explains that he received a few job offers, but they were far away, so he rejected them. Madhu says Vinu can take those jobs now, but Asha replies that they would only consider it if he finds a job nearby. She says if Vinu leaves, she will be completely alone. In the next scene, Asha is shown working at a school. She looks very moody and depressed. Seeing this, the principal calls her and politely tells her to be more pleasant and cheerful while dealing with children. Hearing this makes Asha feel very hurt and embarrassed. She quietly goes to the washroom and starts crying. Later that night, Asha continues crying in her room while Vinu quietly eats his dinner and goes to sleep. After some time, Vinu hears his mother still crying. He goes to check on her, but finds the door locked. When he peeks through the keyhole, he sees a blurry figure inside that looks like his grandmother. The figure suddenly turns toward him. Frightened, Vinu suddenly wakes up, realizing it was a nightmare. Later, Vinu attends a job interview but does not get selected. Feeling frustrated, he meets his friend and tells him that he has tried very hard but still cannot find a job. Vinu then asks if his friend can help him get a job at the place where he recently joined. His friend says he is working at a hotel, but Vinu says that is fine and he will take any job because he wants to leave the place and start earning. The friend asks if Vinu's mother agreed to this. Vinu says he will somehow convince her. His friend then says he will talk to the people at his workplace and try to arrange a job for him. That night, Vinu tells Asha about the job at a hotel that his friend promised to arrange. Asha becomes upset and says they spent a lot of money on his education, so working at a hotel is not right. She reminds him about his studies and the money spent on it. The discussion quickly turns into an argument. Vinu then says he wishes his father was still alive because someone would have understood him. Hearing this makes Asha even more angry, and she says his father only left them with debts. Fight becomes worse, and Vinu finally says he doesn't care anymore and that he is leaving. Feeling hurt and disappointed, Asha goes to her room. The next day at school, Asha is lost in her thoughts about Vinu. Nearby, a girl is playing and making noise with a bat. Already irritated and stressed, Asha suddenly grabs the bat, which accidentally injures the girl. Seeing this, the principal becomes angry and suspends Asha from work for a few days. That night, while Vinu is in his room, he notices that his door slowly opens by itself. Curious, he walks into the living room where we briefly see an old woman walking, but Vinu doesn't find anyone. The next day, Vinu finds his phone broken and argues with Asha, thinking she broke it. The fight becomes worse when Vinu says it's good that his grandmother died, which hurts Asha deeply. Angry, Asha tells him to get out, and Vinu says he is planning to leave anyway. Worried about Vinu, Asha goes to the hospital and talks to Dr. Beena about her son. The doctor tells her that such problems happen in many families, and she should not take it too seriously. She gives Asha some medicine to take before sleeping, and advises her to come and talk to her anytime if she feels troubled. That night, Asha takes her medicine and goes to sleep. Meanwhile, Vinu hears strange noises outside his room, but ignores them and closes the door. After some time, his door slowly opens by itself and he hears the sound of a wheelchair moving. Vinu goes to his grandmother's room and sees the wheelchair in a different place. He checks the washroom, but finds no one there. He then puts the wheelchair back in its place. Suddenly, the room door closes by itself. When Vinu tries to open it, he realizes it is locked. Then he sees the wheelchair moving again and also notices a shadow walking inside the washroom. Terrified, Vinu starts banging on the door and begs his mother to open it. The next day, Asha gets a call from Madhu saying that Vinu is at his house. Asha goes there, and Madhu tells her that Vinu is claiming he saw his grandmother's spirit and that she locked him inside a room. Madhu says Vinu has been talking strangely and might have a problem. He also mentions that he has seen Vinu drinking and smoking. Madhu then calls a counselor named George to talk with Vinu. During the conversation, Vinu explains that the door suddenly shut and locked by itself and later opened on its own. When he came out, no one was there, and even his mother was not in her room. That is why he came to his uncle's house. George asks Vinu whether he had been drinking or smoking the previous night. Vinu says he didn't drink but admits he smoked. When George says the things he saw could be hallucinations, Vinu becomes angry and tells him to leave. After that, George comes out and talks to Madhu. George says Vinu may not have slept properly for several days, and that lack of sleep can make a person see or hear things that are not really there. He also says that if the family history is really the way Madhu described, including his mother's mental health struggles and his grandmother's condition, then Vinu's current state could be connected to that as well. Madhu then asks whether they should take Vinu to a doctor immediately. George says not yet. He explains that he wants to try speaking with Vinu one more time first, and only after that will they decide what to do. He says he will come back again the next day. Asha overhears this conversation, and it makes her even more worried about her son. That night, Asha sleeps in the living room while Vinu stays awake, disturbed by everything happening around him. Suddenly, he hears a noise coming from the kitchen and quickly calls out to his mother. Asha goes to check, but she finds no one there. When she says she did not hear anything, Vinu becomes even more upset and starts wondering if he is the only one hearing these sounds. Asha gently tells him to try to sleep and says everything will be fine. But Vinu angrily shouts that nothing is fine because he is the one hearing and seeing all of it, and then he storms off to his room. The next day, Asha meets her neighbor outside the house. The neighbor greets her, asks how she is doing, and wonders why she is not at work. Asha quietly replies that she is on leave. When the neighbor asks about Vinu, Asha says that he is inside the house. After that, Asha goes back in and locks all the doors and windows, showing that she is becoming withdrawn and isolating herself from others. Later, Asha visits the hospital again, but this time she discovers that Dr. Bina has been transferred and a new doctor has taken her place. The new doctor asks Asha to sit down and explain her problem, but Asha feels uncomfortable. She is already too worried about Vinu and does not feel ready to open up to someone new, so she leaves without saying much. Meanwhile, George goes to Asha's house to counsel Vinu. But when he reaches there, a neighbor tells him that no one is home and warns him not to stand too close to that house alone for too long. George becomes confused and asks why. The neighbor says that there is something wrong with that house and that everyone who has lived there has faced some kind of trouble. George asks whether the house belongs to Asha, but the neighbor explains that they are only living there on rent. When George asks what exactly happened in the house, the neighbor tells him that 7 years earlier, a man living there killed his wife and child and then hanged himself. After that, the house stayed locked for 2 or 3 years. Later, the owner started renting it out again, but none of the tenants stayed there for very long. The neighbor then mentions the last tenant, a banker named Anand. He says Anand was a very good man, but even he once tried to hang himself. Luckily, he survived. Hearing all this, George becomes frightened and leaves immediately. Later, Asha calls him and asks when he will come because Vinu had behaved very strangely the previous night. But George, now clearly scared, lies to her and says that he is out of town. He avoids helping her and says that he will call later. In the next scene, Vinu goes to his friend's house where everyone is drinking, and he joins them, trying to forget everything by drinking and dancing. But when he goes inside the house to pee, he suddenly sees his friend's grandmother and gets so terrified that he urinates in his pants. After returning home, a badly shaken Vinu asks Asha if he can sleep next to her that night because he is too scared to stay alone in his room. This shows how deeply the strange incidents in the house are affecting him and how they are pushing him into fear, stress, and emotional collapse. Later that night, Asha calls George again, but once more he avoids answering. His wife notices this and asks why he's ignoring the call. George says that it is Asha and insists that there is no need to answer. His wife questions him, asking whether he is avoiding the case out of fear. George denies it, but she tells him not to abandon the matter just because of rumors. She says he should first find out whether there is any truth behind the stories, and only then decide what to do. In the next scene, George meets the owner of the house where Asha and Vinu are staying. The owner confirms that the story told by the neighbors is true. He reveals that the family who died in that house were actually his own son, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter. Even after such a terrible tragedy, he still refuses to fully believe that the house is truly haunted. After that, George visits Anand, the banker who had lived in the same house before Asha and Vinu. Anand's wife explains that while living in that house, Anand's biggest problem was sleeplessness, and doctors believed it was caused by stress. One day, after asking her to serve food, Anand went into his room, and when she entered later, she found him hanging. Thankfully, she saw him in time, so he survived, but his mental condition was never stable after that. She also says Anand kept insisting that he had seen someone and heard strange sounds in that house. In the following scene, Vinu meets Priya and opens up about how badly things have been affecting him. He says the strange incidents in the house are real, and that it was not his mother, Asha, who locked him in the room or broke his phone. He tells her he has not slept for 4 days and admits that his mind feels confused and disturbed. When Vinu says his mother even arranged counseling for him, he feels hurt and frustrated, as if everyone thinks he is the one with the problem. Priya is shocked that he hid all this from her, but instead of running away with him, she tells him to first go home, sleep, and calm down. In the end, Vinu feels even more alone because even Priya cannot fully grasp how terrified and broken he has become. After that, Vinu goes to a bar, drinks heavily, gets into a fight, and then starts crying uncontrollably in public. Madhu and Asha bring him back home, and Madhu blames Asha for not handling him properly. He says Vinu now needs strict care, proper rest, therapy, and medication, and pushes the idea that he should be admitted to a hospital. Later, George calls Madhu and says that after investigating, he feels there may actually be some truth in what Vinu was saying about the house. But Madhu dismisses it completely and insists the real problem is Vinu himself, not the house. He tells George that Vinu fought at a bar and that counseling is no longer enough, adding that they will take him to the hospital the next day. Even when George asks to speak to Vinu once, Madhu refuses and decides that institutional treatment is the answer. That night, Asha secretly mixes poison into the food meant for both herself and Vinu, showing how hopeless and trapped she has become. She asks him to eat, saying that after food and sleep, everything will be fine by morning. But Vinu, already broken inside, tells her that what truly scares him is not just the strange events, but the pain of being misunderstood by the people he loves. He asks his mother whether she also thinks he is someone with a problem. As Asha breaks down crying, Vinu becomes emotional too and tells her not to cry, saying he will not hurt her again and begging her to stand by him because no one else understands him. For a brief moment, the two finally connect emotionally and understand each other. Moved by that moment, Asha throws away the poisoned food instead of going through with her plan. While Vinu drinks water, the glass suddenly moves on its own. Terrified, Vinu calls his mother and tells her that a glass moved on its own. At first, she is confused, but within moments, both of them see a chair moving by itself. Terrified, they rush into a room and quickly lock the door. Inside, both of them panic. Just then, someone starts knocking heavily on the door. The knocking grows stronger and stronger until the door slowly opens on its own. In fear, Asha and Vinu decide to run to the front door and escape the house. But when they reach it, they find that it is locked. Vinu asks for the key, and Asha tells him it is on top of the fridge. As Vinu carefully moves toward the fridge, Asha stays behind in the living room. There, she suddenly sees a rope hanging in a disturbing way. At the same time, Vinu is overwhelmed by strange visions. For a moment, he sees a woman sitting on a bed and crying, but when he looks again, no one is there. Then he sees a small child inside the house. Shocked, he quickly grabs the key and runs back toward the front door. But before they can leave, Asha stops him and points toward the living room. There, both of them see a shadowy man sitting in the darkness. The figure slowly begins to move toward them. Vinu is frozen with fear, while Asha tries her best to stay calm. She takes the key from him and with trembling hands struggles to unlock the door as the shadow figure comes closer and closer. At the last moment, they manage to open the door and escape outside. Just before they get away, the shadowy man reaches the doorway and blocks it for a second. Vinu catches a glimpse of its hand, and that sight terrifies him even more. By morning, Asha and Vinu vacate the house. George arrives while they are shifting, and Madhu still refuses to believe in anything supernatural, saying every house has its own problems and that the important thing is that mother and son have finally reconciled. George agrees, choosing not to argue further. In the final moment outside the house, Asha asks Vinu what he is thinking. Vinu says he is thinking about the next people who will come to live there. This ending leaves the horror unresolved, suggesting that the evil in the house is still there, waiting for new victims. The movie ends. And that wraps up Bhoothakaalam. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell for more chilling movie stories. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.